Okay, let's get started with the rigging process. So the first thing we're going to rig for our character is going to be the arms. And for now, we're going to focus on the forward kinematics hierarchy. And the reason is it's the most simple one to do. There's not going to be anything crazy about it. It's just a hierarchy of a bunch of controls, and there's nothing else to it. So we're going to get started with this side of the character. And you will notice when you open the file, which is the final guide end, that I've went ahead and color coded the joints in the character hierarchy. So basically what I did is everything on the left side is light blue, everything on the right side is light green, and the things in the center have no color. So this just helps me more easily identify what kind of object I'm dealing with once I start getting into a more complex list. And for the geometry, I only color coded the folder as this pink color, just to know this is geometry, and the guide rig is blue too, just the folder. So that's just color coding to help me organize my rig a little bit better, so I have an easier time locating stuff when I need it. So what we're going to do is we're going to double click on the clavicle so that we select the entire hierarchy. Let's check it out over here. We're going to hit Control D to duplicate it. So we have now a duplicate of the hierarchy over here. And we're going to take this clavicle 2 object and we're going to unparent it in place. So with compensation on. So this is going to take it out of the rig guide folder. We can collapse it now. And now what we're going to do is we're going to basically change the display properties for all these objects. So let's select everything and let's go to display and let's go to locator shapes. Oops, I missed the clavicle object. So what we're going to do is make these well, basically sort of rectangle shape objects so that they can actually become controls we can easily grab in the viewport, or well, the animator should. So let's do that. I'm going to remove the link options because we don't want any link display properties, and let's hide the guide for now. So we only have the actual objects in there. And let's do the following. The shape is going to be box. And of course they are too big right now. And it's going to be facing down the x-axis, of course. And the size, let's start bringing it down. To something decent. Of course, we're going to resize each one individually. But for now, let's just make them small so we can actually see what's going on in the viewports. Okay. So that's going to be enough. And now we can go to each one of them. So let's get started with the hand. All the locators at the end of each finger, we don't need those. So just go ahead, select them and delete them. And let's just work with these guys over here. So what we want is a box that covers the area where the bone would be. The thing is, right now our boxes have their pivot right on the center, so we want them to actually move over. And the locator shapes fortunately have offsets, so we can use the offsets to handle these moving of the actual shape over to where they should be. So let's check the size on this guy. We're gonna make him wider. So let's see, on X, that's gonna be taller. And let's say that he should be 40 millimeters long. Then that means that his offset, if I want him to be at the end, like the end of the box at the pivot location, has to be half of that. So 20 millimeters, there you go. So that's a good match. So all you want to do is get the right size, and the offset is going to be always half of that. And let's shape him a little bit more this way and a little bit wider. There you go. That's a good start for him. And now let's do this guy. So let's say that this guy is going to be, let's try 36. Oh, that's meters. And then the offset would be 18. It's a little bit short, so let's do 42 millimeters again. And this is going to be 21. Well, I could keep nudging this, but I'm not going to, just because you can, but you don't want to watch me do it. I'll have it done by the end of the file. But the idea is you want to resize each one of the finger joints to have a box that the animator could easily grab, okay, to manipulate that particular part of the hand. So let's leave this guy like that. I am going to continue to resize the rest of the joints on the hand, and I'll get back to you as soon as that's done. So see you in a second. Okay, I'm done. This is the resulting locators that I have. I've shaped them more or less to have the shape of the joint that I'm going to be manipulating. There's this extra joint over here, which is the wrist joint that we're not going to be needing. So he's right here. We're going to delete it in a second, but first I want to show you something neat that you can do also if you prefer, which is you can take all the locators you've just modified, and you can offset them in Y. So what that will do is put them actually over their corresponding joint, and this might actually be easier to select for the animators, and then you can make them smaller if you want, so that they can just oops, I should not scale all the channels. Maybe just okay, let's scale them on this axis and on this one. So that will make them easier to select. And you can actually scale them a little bit less than. Oops, we gotta keep this relative. I just want to use the it's modifying all of them. Well, I can make them shorter one by one, but I guess you get the idea. This might just help selecting them easier outside of the hand. And the important thing here is that, as you can see, the pivot points have not moved. We're just basically moving the shape off to somewhere where it can be easier to get to. And let's just get this guy to a little bit wider shape. So there you go. That's going to be the hand. Okay. Now we're going to do the forearm, which is going to be something a little bit bigger. This one is going to actually go around the arm. So let's make him something kind of like that. And then let's make him bigger on X. And if we do 270, then this has to be 140. That's a little bit too long. So let's do 250 and 125. Still a little bit long, but we can make it shorter. Actually, he doesn't have to reach the hand. So let's go straight for 200 and 100 over here. There you go. So that's our forearm. And then over here we have the upper arm. So let's make this guy bigger too. Something like that. And then on X, let's try 250 on this guy. It looks like it's going to be a little bit big. No. That was just right. So there you go. And now for the clavicle. Let's make this guy something kind of like that. And we're just gonna make him longer. On X, let's say 150. And then this has to be 75. And we're going to push it forward over the character so that it's also easier to select. So there you go. That's pretty much it. There's just a couple of joints that we want to get rid of. This one over here, we don't really need it. So let's just first parent this guy to this guy, parent in place, and now we can delete him. And now let's parent the hand over to the forearm, parent in place, and we get rid of him. There you go. And let's, for now, get rid of the coloring on the hierarchy. Well, it looks like might have a refresh problem here because it's already on none, but the colors are not gone. But we're gonna worry about that later. So that's it. That's our FK hierarchy. We're not done with it, but in the next video, I'm gonna show you how to make sure that our transforms are reset and zeroed for forward kinematics hierarchies, because there's a couple of ways of doing that. So see you in the next video. Okay, let's talk about zeroing out our controls. And by controls, I mean anything that you're going to, or the animator is going to manipulate directly. And let's see how to zero things, because there's a couple of approaches for that, and also why you would want to do that. So, but to do that, we're going to work on not this scene, but a new one. Why? Because we can. Well, it's really nice that Modo can have different scenes open at the same time, and you can actually copy and paste stuff between them, which is really great. But just for the sake of clarity, we're going to use a new scene. So I'm creating a locator, and let's change its display. Let's make it custom, not solid, running down the x-axis just to make it consistent with what we've done before. And let's make this 100 millimeters, and let's say 500 on X, and of course 250 as an offset. There you go. And let's do a few of these guys. So we're duplicating and moving, duplicate, move, duplicate, move, and let's do a last one. So there you go. We have 5 locators, okay? And now let's parent them in forward kinematics chain. So we're just gonna parent this guy to this guy, this guy to this guy, this guy to this guy, this guy to this guy. There you go. There they are. So let's say that your initial pose was something kind of like this. Let's rotate them a little bit. Like, let's say you were following the mesh and you rotated your locators to look something like that, okay? And now you're ready to animate them. Well, there's one problem that you or the animator are going to have, and it's that the transforms are not zeroed out, which means that over here in position you have an offset, rotation you have an offset. So what that does is when you start animating, let's bring up the graph editor, you're gonna see something like this. Let's key this rotation. Let's go to this frame, and let's say you want to rotate it more like that. So what you see is that the function curve that you just created doesn't really start at 0. It starts somewhere up here. And if these guys had more like rotations that don't line up with the world orientation, then you have a bunch of curves coming out from different places, all going out in different directions. So it becomes a little bit hard to manage those kind of function curves. Ideally, what you would like is to everything start at 0, and then from there you could see the curves coming out. So that's what we're going to do. That's what we call zero out the transforms of an object. And there's a couple of ways of doing that. Modo has a really convenient one, and I'm going to show you a different approach that has obviously its own pros and cons, as both are. I'm going to explain both to you, and then we're just going to pick one. So let me just let's delete the animation on this guy. So let's take off that keyframe, and let's take off this one. We're back to normal. Okay, so to show you this, I am going to duplicate this hierarchy, and let's move it over. Oops, I just need to move the first locator, because then I get double transforms. Let's move it over here. There you go. So there's the first approach, okay, which is Modo has a really nice and elegant way of doing this. Let's select everything, which is you just use a 0 command in the properties panel for the transforms. So in this case, I don't really care about the position because I'm not going to move these guys. This chain is just going to rotate, but I do care about the rotation. So we can see that this guy has an offset of 20 degrees. This guy is 6.5, this guy is 10, so on and so forth. But if I select everything and I say 0 the rotations, then as you can see, everything goes to 0. So that gives me a really nice starting point for my animation, because if I bring up again the graph editor, and let's key this guy again. Let's say I'm gonna rotate here, and then over here I rotate like that. As you can see, the function curve did start at 0 and then goes up to the value you see here. And if I had, again, rotations, even if they were not lined up to the world, they would all anyway start at 0. Okay, so that comes in very handy. That's what you want to have. We want to have everything zeroed before you start animating. So what Modo actually did, and you probably are already having a good idea of what happened, is if you go to the channel list, you will see that now we have a secondary transform for rotations. And as you can see, it has a value. This is the value we had before. So when you say, okay, Modo 0, these transforms for me, what Modo does is it takes the current values that you see in the UI and it stores them in a secondary transform. They go over there. And then it creates a primary transform, and then it has 0 values because everything is in the secondary. So you don't have to deal with the secondary transforms anymore. You can always deal with the values you see here, and you're going to be okay. So that's one way. What's the advantages? Well, the advantages is, as you can see, it's very simple to do. And the other thing that is really great about it is you can just select an entire hierarchy if you're in local mode, and you can manipulate all the objects at the same time to have like curling motions and stuff like that. So that's really nice. And obviously all the function curves are going to go to the right places. What's the cons of this approach? Well, the only con for this approach is you got to be aware that you're creating extra transforms, and you got to be careful with managing them and make sure you don't delete them, or if you are going to do it, just be careful about it. But that's basically the only thing. So what's the other approach at doing this? There's other software packages that can't have multiple transform channels for the same object. So the only way to achieve something like this in these other packages is to create intermediate nodes or objects in this case, and they're often referred to as parents. So what you do is you create for each object in the hierarchy a parent that exactly matches the object's orientation and position, and you insert it in the hierarchy. So by having a parent that has the exact same transforms, you have effectively zeroed out the child. So let me show you how that would work. We would create a locator, and let's make it smaller. And let's set it to insert. And we're going to insert it here. There you go. So let's see what happened. We have locator 6, then we have this one, and then we have this one, okay? So let's create a few more locators, and we're going to need 1, 2, 3 more. There you go. So we take this guy, and we also insert it over here. Then we take this guy, we insert it over here, and we take this guy and we insert it over here, okay? So what you're doing is this guy is getting parented to the locator you inserted. And because the transforms are exactly the same, you can see that everything is zeroed because his transforms relative to its parent are, there's no transforms. Everything is 0, they match. Of course, this guy, relative to its parent, which is the next object in the hierarchy, he does have an offset because there is a difference in rotation between this object and this parent null. Okay, and you can continue going up the hierarchy and you have everything zeroed out. So the advantages of this approach is you don't have to worry about dealing with channels at all. You can always just use your primaries and reference them in the schematic if you are going to do relationships and stuff like that, and not worry about the initial transforms of the object. The cons of this approach is, of course, you're creating extra objects in the hierarchy, extra items. So this creates more complexity in the scene. There's going to be more stuff to manage. Your lists are going to be longer and stuff like that. And obviously, if you go for this effect, you're going to have the problem that those parents are also being transformed, which we don't want. You do not want to transform the parents. You want to just transform the objects. So it's a little bit more cumbersome because you cannot do stuff like that. You would have to select everything manually, like get this guy, then this guy, and then this guy. You cannot double click on the hierarchy because you get the parents too. And then once that's selected, then you can rotate them. Okay. So that's basically the two approaches that you have towards zeroing out stuff. The nice thing is once everything is zeroed out, even if you use this approach too, let's say you get into a funky pose. Let's do something like this. Let's rotate this guy, and then his parent is more like that, and his parent is going down, and this guy's like that, and so on and so forth. And you want to return to your base pose, you can just select entire hierarchy and say reset the rotations, and everything goes back to the pose you had when you started. Okay, so that's it. That's basically how zeroing out controls work. We are going to be doing this quite often for our rig. We want all the controls to be zeroed out. And the method we're going to use is we're going to be using the channels. We're going to be zeroing out things through the UI to get extra channels. And just because, honestly, it provides more advantages than drawbacks, I see, especially when it comes to manipulating the hierarchies directly. And we're not really going to have to worry too much about those secondary channels. We're just going to leave them there and not touch them and let them be. So that's it. Let's get back to our rig in the next video. Okay, now that we agreed that we're going to zero everything out, let's just do that. So I'm just going to double click on the clavicle so I can select the entire hierarchy, and I'm going to go to zero all. We don't really care about position and scale actually, because we're not going to be moving or scaling these controls, but it's only rotation. But I'm just going to freeze all, zero everything, and as you can see, everything goes to 0. So what happened is, if you select one of the joints that we have here and go to the channel list, you will see that Modo added a position 0 and then rotation 0 transforms, also for scale, to this object. So it's storing in there the original transforms that we had exposed before, and it's giving you new primary transforms already zeroed out to work with. So in this case, we don't want to touch these anymore. We're not going to be doing anything to these channels, not merging or deleting. We're going to make sure they stay as is, because these are actually not joints, these are controls, and I'm going to explain the difference in a second. But that's pretty much done. So I'm going to mirror these to the other side, but before that, let's just rename everything so that all this is properly named. So in this case, for example, this guy is called JNTR clavicle 2. We're going to change the name to another prefix, which in this case is CTL. I use this to make it obvious this is a control. I often name things in a rig based on what they are, the type of object I'm dealing with, but I also maybe more often name them according to function, because one particular object could be used for different things in the rig. For example, locators. Locators are generic helpers, if you want to call them that you can use for multiple things. So instead of just calling everything a locator, locator arm, locator mouth, locator whatever, I prefer to call them something based on what they're going to do. They could be controls, they could be marker points, they could be references, they could be rig controls, they could be constraint targets, they could be many things. So that way I can have a more clear vision of what that object is doing in the rig, and I don't have to go back and forth looking at the hierarchy or the schematic view or just moving it around to see what happens to figure out what the object does. So in this case, these guys are going to be controls because the animator is going to directly manipulate them. He's going to be animating with these objects. This is the forward kinematic controls chain for the arm. So I'm going to be calling them something that reflects that. So CTL is a prefix I use for controls. So I'm just going to be changing the prefixes and getting rid of the number suffix at the end. So there you go. I'm going to do one more. And there you go. I'm going to do the rest. You don't have to stick around for that, and I'll be right back. Okay, so now everything is properly named. We have our entire arm worked, and it's looking good. So now we can do the right side. So we're going to do that very, very quickly. It's actually very simple to do. I'm going to double click on the clavicle again to get the entire hierarchy, and I'm going to duplicate it. So now that it's duplicated over here, I'm going to grab this clavicle, and using a match drop action, I'm going to drag and drop it over to this side's clavicle. Then I'm going to do the same for the upper arm and then for the lower arm. And as you can see, something is funky. Well, what's going on is that I'm properly aligning the actual locator to the bone. It's using the proper alignment. However, because this side is mirrored, the shape is wrong. And if you remember, we changed the display properties for each one of these guys. So what I need to do is to use display properties that are also mirrored. And that's very easy. All I need to do is change the offsets. I'm going to use the exact same value, but I'm going to change the sign it has before it. So if it's positive, it has to be negative. If it's negative, it has to be positive. So this 75 has to be a minus 75. And as you can see, this moves to the proper position over here. And then this negative has to be positive, and now the clavicle is at its proper place. And as you match stuff, I really suggest you work from the root of the hierarchy your way down, because if you do it the other way, if you had started with the fingers, as you move the parents to the proper positions, the children are going to shift again, and you have to go back and redo it. So always start with the the parents in the hierarchy and work your way down. So let's change this guy to minus 100 over here. And this guy, the display properties you can do in any order you want, because you're not really doing any changes on the object itself. This is just used for the display purposes. So I'm going to continue with the hand and then all the finger joints, and I'll be right back in a second. Okay, I'm done. I've renamed everything and realigned everything. As you can see, I changed some of the names, the R for an L because we're on the left side, and I also fixed the numbering. And everything is properly aligned and displayed. Now the last thing that remains is if you check out one of these controls, and we come to its transforms, you will see there are values in there. And the reason is, well, we just realigned everything. Everything is repositioned. So that's why you see those over there. That the moment we took them and we did all the drag and drop stuff to get them to match their parents, we have some change of axes and stuff like that. So not their parents, but I mean the joints that they're going to be controlling. So we're just going to go and double click again on the hierarchy and zero these guys, and now everything is zeroed. As you can see, the channels are now fine again. We have distort rotations and everything, the rest is zeroed. So that completes our work on the FK hierarchies for the arms, and we can move on to work on the IK arms, which is going to be in the next video. Okay, before moving on to working on the IK system for the arms, let's do a little bit of scene management over here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a group locator, and we're going to call this guy Ace Controls. So we're going to put in here anything that is a control. So in this case, this includes all the FK controls that we already created. So let's take them both and move them over here. Okay, so now we have our Ace controls over there. And the second thing I'm going to do is let's color them differently. But I don't want to color them in the items list. I want to color them in the viewport so that it's more obvious that these are FK controls. So let's just do that. Let's use a user color for them. So let's try to use like a light blue, something like that. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, a little bit bright, but let's leave them like that. So that's going to be our color for FK controls. Okay. And we're going to color our folder. Controls are going to be yellow. Okay. So now it's easy to distinguish our folder wherever he is. And the other thing we're going to do is we're going to duplicate our guide rig. And the reason is this has been our guide so far, okay? And we have been using it to get other parts of the rig to be duplicates of these or just to match them. But we're going to get later to the point where we're going to start to actually develop the rig that is going to move. We're not going to use the guide rig. The guide rig is going to be there only for reference purposes, so that if we ever want to change something, like something was not placed properly, we can do it in the guide rig and then go back to each one of the other rigs and snap them back over to the guide. So we're not going to be touching the guide anymore, okay? It's going to remain hidden. And we're going to be using a different rig, which is going to be for now a duplicate of this one, to move different parts of the character around. So we're going to take our guide rig and just duplicate it. Now we're going to hide the guide, and we're going to call this Ace, and we're going to call this one main rig. Okay, and of course we're going to have to come in here and rename certain things, okay, because you're going to see that our guide rig now has suffixes and stuff like that because of the duplicates we just did. So we're gonna do that. We're gonna take care of all the naming, and that's gonna be our main animation rig from now on. We're gonna keep the guide hidden. So I'm gonna go ahead and rename all this, and I'll come back in a second just to show you what that looks like. Okay, so see you in 1 sec. Okay, I'm done. So let me show you what I did. As you can see, we have over here the guide rig folder, and I just basically appended to each object the word guide to its name. So it's at the end of the name, so we know that those are the guides, so we can retain. Modo requires unique names on all of its items. And then for the main rig, I just kept the original names. I just got rid of the appended 2 numbers that they had, and I have the original names back. So that's pretty much it. I'm gonna keep the guide rig hidden from now on, and let's change the color on the main rig folder. Let's make it I don't know, light purple. Wow, another one of these refresh problems. So now that that's done, we can move on to create our IK system for the arms. So let's go there.